Young Nelson collapsed on the dusty roadside, seizing violently. His mother screamed for help, but the crowd just watched. Only Obi Emeka, a poor shoemaker, stepped forward. "He is dying," the mother wailed. "The hospital turned us away. If I don't pay the deposit today, my son is gone." Obi's heart broke. Hidden in his tunic was a heavy bundle of cash, his life savings, scraped together for 10 years to finally buy a real shop. It was his only ticket out of poverty. But looking at the boy's rolling eyes, Obi didn't think twice. "How much?" he asked. 50,000 naira, she sobbed. Obi pulled out the bundle meant for his future and placed it in her trembling hands. "Take it. Go save him. A shop can wait. A life cannot." Stunned, she grasped the money. "Thank you, sir. We will never forget you." "Go quickly," Obi urged, helping them into a taxi. As the car sped away, Obi sat back on his wooden stool, touched his empty pocket, and wept silently, knowing he had just given away his dream to save a stranger. The dust from the taxi had barely settled when the crushing reality of what he had done slammed into Obi. He stood frozen on the roadside, his hand hovering over the chest pocket of his faded tunic. It was flat. The familiar, reassuring bulge of the black nylon bag, 50,000 naira, 10 years of sweat, hunger, and self-denial was gone. He stared at the empty stretch of road where the car had vanished, his heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against his ribs. "Obi, you have finally gone mad." The shout came from Emeka, the vulcanizer whose workshop was a few feet away. He had watched the exchange with his mouth hanging open, and now he marched over, wiping grease onto a dirty rag and shaking his head aggressively. "Tell me, you did not just give that woman your shop money. Tell me I am seeing things." Obi sank onto his low wooden stool, picking up a torn sandal just to give his trembling hands something to do. He couldn't meet his friend's eyes. "The boy was dying, Emeka. You saw him. He was foaming at the mouth. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to mind your business," Emeka spat, gesturing wildly at the squalor around them. "Look at you. You wear rags. You eat once a day. That money was your life. You think because you saved them, they will come back and make you a king." A small crowd of market women had gathered, clucking their tongues not in sympathy, but in disbelief. The story of the shoemaker's foolishness was already spreading. "You act like Father Christmas when you sleep on a mat," one woman sneered, adjusting her tray of peppers. "Rich people forget, Obi. They utilize us and throw us away. As soon as that boy is well, they will wash their hands of the dirty shoemaker who helped them. They won't remember your name." The words stung because Obi feared they were true. He looked down at his tools, the rusted hammer, the dull knife, the tin of cheap glue. That money was his escape. It was the concrete walls and glass windows he had dreamed of every night. Now, it was just air. "God sees," Obi whispered, though his voice cracked with doubt. "God sees." Emeka hissed and walked away. "God gave you a brain, and you threw it away." As the sun went down and the market emptied, Obi remained on his stool. The silence around him felt less like peace and more like a tomb. He had saved a life, but as the cold evening wind bit through his thin shirt, he knew he had buried his own future in the process. "I'm so grateful you're here with me, my beautiful story family." If today's story has already pulled you in, show some love by clicking subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. I love knowing where my family is. Tomorrow brings another emotional journey you absolutely cannot miss, so make sure you're subscribed and ready. Consciousness returned to Nelson in a slow white haze, accompanied by the sharp smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of a monitor. When he finally opened his eyes, the terrifying darkness of the seizure was gone, replaced by the sterile brightness of a hospital ward. His mother was sleeping in a plastic chair beside his bed, clutching a rosary, looking 10 years older than she had that morning. When she saw him stir, she collapsed onto his chest, weeping not with sorrow, but with the terrifying relief of a mother who had almost buried her child. It was only 2 days later, when the danger had fully passed, that she told him the truth. She held his hand tightly and spoke in a hushed, reverent tone. "You are alive because an angel touched you, Nelson," she whispered. "A poor man, a shoemaker on the roadside. He didn't know us. He didn't know your name. But when the hospital demanded the deposit, he gave me everything he had, 50,000 naira. It was his life savings." Nelson, though young and weak, felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. He tried to picture the man, a blurry figure in the heat, but all he could remember was a voice shouting, "Go, save him." 3 weeks later, the day Nelson was discharged, their first stop was not home, but the marketplace. His mother had saved a small basket of fruits and a thank-you note, intending to get his contact information to pay him back slowly. They navigated the chaotic, noisy street, dodging motorcycles and hawkers, their eyes scanning for the umbrella and the wooden box. But when they reached the spot, the space was empty. The wooden stool was gone. The tattered umbrella was gone. In its place, a woman was frying bean cakes, the hot oil hissing loudly. Nelson's mother grew frantic. She rushed to the vulcanizer working nearby, the man who had shouted at the shoemaker weeks ago. "Please, sir," she asked, breathless, "where is the shoemaker, the one who worked here?" Emeka, the vulcanizer, barely looked up from the tire he was patching. He spat on the ground, his face hard. "Gone. Police raid. They came last week to clear illegal structures. They took his box, took his tools. He ran." "Do you know where he lives?" she begged. "Who knows where a street rat lives?" Emeka muttered, though there was a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "He is gone, madam. You people took his money, and the police took his livelihood. He has nothing left here." Nelson stood on the edge of the road, staring at the patch of dirt where his savior used to sit. The bustling market moved on around them, indifferent to the tragedy of a good man erased from existence. They asked 3 other vendors, but no one knew where Obi had gone. The city had swallowed him whole. As they walked away, Nelson gripped his mother's hand, a heavy, silent vow forming in his young heart. He would survive, he would grow strong, and he would never stop looking for the man with the empty pocket. The air conditioning in the executive suite of Alabi Holdings was always set to a crisp chill, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the marketplace that still haunted Nelson's nightmares. At 30 years old, Nelson Alabi was no longer the sickly boy convulsing in the dirt. He was a titan of real estate, a man whose signature could alter the skyline of the city. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking down at the sprawling chaos of Lagos from 40 stories up. To the world, he was the golden boy, a self-made billionaire who turned every project into gold. But Nelson knew the truth. He wasn't self-made. He was purchased. His life had been bought and paid for by a stranger's 50,000 naira. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke blue suit, the kind that cost more than most men earned in a year, and sighed. Success had not brought him peace. It had only amplified his debt. Every time he closed a deal or popped a bottle of champagne, he felt a sharp pang of guilt. Somewhere out there, in the grinding poverty of the city, was the man who had made it all possible. Was he hungry? Was he sick? Was he even alive? The uncertainty gnawed at Nelson like a physical wound. There was a soft knock on the door, and his personal assistant, Sarah, entered, followed by a heavy-set man in a dark suit, Mr. Okon, the head of his private security detail. "Sir," Okon said, his voice grave, "we checked the old municipal records again, the demolition files from 20 years ago." Nelson turned slowly, his eyes intense. "And dead ends, sir," Okon admitted, shifting uncomfortably. "The police raid that cleared that market didn't keep detainee logs. The specific area where the shoemakers worked was leveled to build the new shopping complex. We interviewed 3 old traders from that time. They remember a man named Obi, or Ogashu, but no one knows his surname or his village. Most people think he went back to the east. Or what?" Nelson snapped. "Or he died on the street, sir. It has been 20 years. Poverty kills quickly." Nelson slammed his hand against the thick glass of the window, startling Sarah. "He is not dead. He cannot be dead until I say thank you." He walked back to his massive mahogany desk and picked up a sketch he had drawn from memory, a rough charcoal drawing of a wooden box with a distinct metal latch. "I don't care about the records, Okon. I don't care if you have to knock on every door in every slum in this state." He was a cobbler. He had a wooden box with a cracked handle. He had a scar on his left thumb. Find the man with the wooden box. Double the reward. Put his description on the radio. Just find him. Okon nodded, sensing the desperation in his boss's voice. "We will keep looking, sir." As they left, Nelson sat alone in the silence of his empire, surrounded by wealth he couldn't fully enjoy. He pulled out his checkbook, staring at the blank lines. He could write a check for millions right now, But he couldn't write the one check that mattered. He was the most powerful man in the city, yet he felt like a helpless boy again, waiting for an angel who might never return. Time had not been kind to Obi Emeka. It had been a butcher, carving away his strength, his sight, and his dignity piece by piece. 20 years after he had emptied his pockets to save a stranger, Obi sat hunched on a plastic crate in the shadow of a rusted pedestrian bridge, a place far removed from the busy market he once commanded. He was no longer the strong, proud artisan with a dream of a glass-fronted shop. He was the mad old man of the junction, a ghost in tattered brown rags that hung loosely off his skeletal frame. His hands, once steady enough to stitch the finest leather, now trembled with a persistent, violent shake. For 10 minutes, Obi had been trying to thread a needle to patch a customer's worn-out sandal. He squinted, his eyes milky with untreated cataracts, trying to guide the fraying thread through the tiny eye. "Baba, are you doing it or not?" The customer, a young motorcycle rider, shouted impatiently. "I have passengers waiting. If you can't see, go and beg like your mates." "I am doing it, my son. I am doing it," Obi mumbled, his voice a dry rasp. He took a deep breath, willing his hands to still, but the thread missed again. The rider hissed, snatched the sandal from Obi's lap, and threw a crumpled 50 naira note into the dust. "Keep the money. You are useless." The rider sped off, leaving Obi staring at the needle in his hand. Shame burned in his chest, hotter than the midday sun. He slowly bent down to pick up the 50 naira. It was humiliating, but pride would not fill his belly. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning a small wrap of moi moi that had given him heartburn all night. 50 naira could buy a sachet of water and a handful of roasted groundnuts. That was his dinner. He leaned back against the concrete pillar of the bridge, closing his eyes against the grit and the noise. The city had grown taller, louder, and crueler. High-rise buildings gleamed in the distance, mocking him with their glass reflections. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night when the hunger pangs were sharpest, he wondered about the boy. Was he alive? Did he grow up? Or had Obi sacrificed his future for a ghost? He rubbed his thumb over the scar on his hand, the only souvenir of a life he used to have. He didn't regret saving the child, but God, he was tired. He was so very tired of suffering for it. The trouble arrived the next morning in a convoy of yellow pickup trucks, sirens wailing not to warn, but to intimidate. Men in green uniforms jumped out, wielding cans of red spray paint like weapons. They moved down the line of roadside squatters, spraying jagged red X's on makeshift stalls, umbrellas, and even the concrete pillars of the bridge. It was the mark of death for the street market, the universal sign of demolition. When they reached Obi, the leader, a man with a potbelly and cruel eyes, kicked the side of Obi's wooden box. "Old man, you are deaf?" he barked. "This area is a zero-tolerance zone now. Urban beautification project. We don't want rubbish on the governor's road." Obi scrambled to shield his box, his heart fluttering like a trapped bird. "Ogre, please," he stammered, his hands raised in supplication. "I am not rubbish. I am a shoemaker. I have been here for 5 years. Where do you want me to go?" "That is your business," the official sneered, spraying a thick red cross on the pavement right between Obi's feet. The sharp chemical fumes of the paint choked the old man. "You have 24 hours. If we come back tomorrow and meet this wood here, we burn it. If we meet you here, we lock you up. Do you hear me?" He didn't wait for an answer. The convoy moved on, leaving a trail of red crosses and wailing women in its wake. Obi stared at the red paint, fresh and dripping like blood on the concrete. This spot was his only anchor. Under this bridge, he stayed dry when it rained. Here, he made the 50 or 100 naira that kept him alive. Without this spot, he was not a shoemaker. He was a beggar. He was nothing. Night fell, heavy and suffocating. Other squatters were already packing, tying bundles with frantic haste, moving to other slums before the bulldozers arrived. But Obi sat still. His legs were too weak to carry his box across the city, and his spirit was too broken to start over. He touched the smooth, worn wood of his toolbox. He would not leave. If they wanted to crush him, let them do it here. He had nowhere else to go. The deadline expired at noon with the roar of diesel engines. The green, kick against indisciplined trucks swerved onto the service lane, screeching to a halt like predators circling wounded prey. The rest of the squatters had vanished in the night, leaving behind only debris and dust. But Obi sat frozen on his stool, his wooden box clutched to his chest like a child. He was shaking, not from cold, but from a terror that seized his very bones. The pot-bellied leader jumped down from the lead truck, his baton swinging loosely by his side. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. "Old man," he sighed, signaling his men with a lazy wave of his hand. "I told you, we don't joke here. You think because you are old, the law will bend for you?" Two younger officers in heavy combat boots marched forward. They didn't ask him to move. One simply kicked the wooden stool out from under him. Obi hit the concrete hard, his hip crying out in sharp agony, but his hands never left the box. "Please," he cried, his voice thin and shrill, struggling to rise from the dirt. "This is my life. I will go now." "Too late," the officer sneered. He reached down, grabbed the handle of the wooden box, and yanked. Obi held on with a strength born of pure desperation, his knuckles white, his fingernails digging into the splintered wood. "No, do not take it. It is all I have." "Leave it, you mad man," the officer shouted, raising his heavy baton. He struck Obi's forearm, a sickening thwack of wood against bone. Obi screamed, his grip failing as pain blinded him. The box flew from his hands, crashing onto the road and bursting open. 20 years of tools, his rusted hammer, his awls, the tins of polish, the very soul of his trade scattered into the dirt and gutter. "Clear this rubbish," the leader barked. The officers began kicking the tools away, and one raised a heavy boot, aiming a stomp at Obi's chest to keep him pinned to the ground. Just feet away, separated only by a low concrete median, the frantic gridlock of city traffic had ground to a halt. Amidst the sea of battered taxis and yellow buses, a phantom sat idling, an obsidian-black Rolls-Royce Phantom, gleaming like a jewel in the filth. Its windows were tinted pitch dark, sealing off the occupant from the heat and the noise. But as the officer's boot hovered over the weeping old man, the luxury car let out a long, aggressive blast of its horn, a deep, naval sound that vibrated through the ground, freezing the attackers in place. The heavy rear door of the Rolls-Royce swung open, defying the chaos of the street. A hush fell over the immediate vicinity as a polished black shoe stepped directly into a puddle of oily mud. Nelson Alabi emerged, tall and imposing, dressed in an immaculate three-piece blue suit that seemed to radiate light against the grey squalor of the underbridge. He didn't look at the traffic. He didn't look at his security guards scrambling to catch up with him. His eyes were locked on the heap of brown rags on the ground. "Ogre, go back inside," the KAI leader shouted, trying to regain his authority, though his voice wavered. "This is a government operation. Stay back." Nelson ignored him as if he were a buzzing fly. He walked straight toward the officer with a terrifying, silent purpose. As the first drops of a sudden downpour began to spot the pavement, Nelson reached into the car and pulled out a large, rainbow-colored umbrella. He didn't hand it to a guard. He snapped it open himself, a vibrant burst of color blooming in the monochrome misery of the scene. The officer with the raised boot stumbled back, intimidated by the sheer aura of wealth and power radiating from the stranger. Nelson didn't stop until he was standing over Obi. He crouched down in the dirt, indifferent to the mud staining the knees of his bespoke trousers. He angled the colorful umbrella so it completely shielded the trembling old man from the rain and the officers. Obi flinched, shielding his face with his bruised arm, expecting another blow. "Please, I am going," he whimpered into the dirt. "Don't hit me. Look at me," Nelson commanded, his voice shaking not with anger, but with an emotion too deep for words. He reached out his hand, smooth, manicured, and adorned with a gold watch, and grasped Obi's rough, dirt-crusted fingers. The contact was electric. The image of the billionaire in the blue suit, holding the hand of the beggar under a rainbow umbrella, froze the entire street. Cars slowed down to watch. The officers lowered their batons, paralyzed by the confusion of the moment. Nelson squeezed the old man's hand, anchoring him back to reality. He looked up at the KAI leader, his eyes cold and deadly serious. "If you touch him one more time," Nelson said, his voice low enough to be a growl, "I will make sure it is the last thing you ever do in this city." The rain drummed heavily against the taut fabric of the colorful umbrella, creating a private sanctuary in the middle of the chaotic street. Obi peered up through his cataract-clouded eyes, trying to make sense of the man looming over him. He saw a face of smooth, dark skin, worried eyes, and a suit that cost more than Obi had earned in a lifetime. He felt small, ashamed of his filth, and tried to pull his hand away from the rich man's grip. "Let me go, sir," Obi croaked, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I am dirty. I will stain you." But Nelson held on tighter. His gaze had fallen onto Obi's left hand, the hand he was clutching. There, running across the base of the thumb, was a jagged, silvery scar. It was an old injury, one Obi had gotten from a slip of his knife years ago, the same scar Nelson had stared at through a haze of pain as a dying child. Nelson's breath hitched. He looked past the hand to the wreckage of the wooden box lying in the mud. The lid had cracked open, revealing a specific, rusted metal latch, a latch Nelson had drawn from memory 100 times in his search. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the traffic, the shouting officers, the rain, it all fell away. Slowly, deliberately, Nelson Alabi did the unthinkable. He lowered himself further, sinking both knees directly into the oily sludge of the road until he was eye level with the shoemaker. The crowd gasped. The KAI officers took a step back, stunned to see a tycoon kneeling before a beggar. "Baba," Nelson whispered, his voice cracking. "Look at me closely." Obi squinted, confused by the intimacy of the stranger. "I don't know you, sir. I have nothing to give you." "You already gave me everything," Nelson said, tears mixing with the rain on his face. 20 years ago, a boy was dying right here. You gave his mother 50,000 naira. You gave them your shop money." Obi's body went rigid. The memory, buried under years of hardship, clawed its way to the surface. He stared at the man's face, searching for the ghost of the child he had saved. "The boy," Obi breathed, his lips trembling. "The boy with the appendix?" "I am the boy," Nelson choked out. "I am Nelson Alabi. You saved my life." Obi stared at him, his mouth opening and closing without sound. He reached out a shaking, dirty hand and touched Nelson's wet cheek, as if checking to see if he was real. "You lived?" he whispered, his voice breaking into a sob. "My God, you lived?" "I lived," Nelson wept, pulling the old man into a fierce embrace, ruining his suit with mud and tears. "I lived because of you, and I finally found you." Nelson stood up, pulling the frail old man with him, lifting him out of the mud as if he weighed nothing. Obi stumbled, his legs weak from shock, and instinctively turned back toward the wreckage of his livelihood. His rusted hammer, the dull knife, and the tin of polish lay scattered in the gutter, washing away in the relentless rain. Panic flared in his eyes. He bent down, his hands shaking violently, trying to salvage the broken pieces of his wooden box. "My tools," Obi stammered, his voice cracking with the terror of a man who knows only survival. "Sir, please. If I lose them, I cannot work. I will starve." Nelson placed a firm hand on Obi's shoulder, stopping him. "Leave it, Baba." "But it is all I have," Obi whispered, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "No," Nelson said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You have a son now, and you will never work another day in your life. I promise you." He guided Obi toward the open door of the Rolls-Royce. The crowd watched in stunned silence, and the KAI officials, realizing the gravity of their mistake, vanished into the shadows. As Nelson helped the beggar into the back seat of the most expensive car in the city, Obi hesitated. He looked at the pristine cream leather, then at his own mud-caked rags. "I will stain it," Obi murmured, pulling back. "I am too dirty." "This car can be washed," Nelson said, gently pushing him inside. "But I cannot replace you." As the heavy door sealed shut with a soft thud, the noise of the rain, the insults of the officers, and the chaos of the market instantly vanished. They were enveloped in a cocoon of silence, cooled by air conditioning and scented with vanilla and rich leather. As the car began to glide forward, Obi pressed his face against the tinted glass, watching the bridge, his home of suffering for 20 years, disappear into the grey distance. For the first time in decades, he closed his eyes and exhaled. The transition to his new life was a blur of tenderness. When they arrived at Nelson's sprawling estate, the staff did not look at Obi with disgust. They looked at him with the reverence due a patriarch. That night, after a hot bath that scrubbed away the grime of the streets, Obi stood before a mirror. He was dressed in a soft silk robe, his hair trimmed, his face clean. The madman of the bridge was gone. In his place stood a tired but dignified elder. Nelson stood in the doorway, holding a cup of tea. "Welcome home, father," Nelson said. 5 years later, the sun set over the manicured gardens of the Alabi estate, casting a golden glow over the scene. Obi Emeka sat in a plush armchair on the patio, dressed in a crisp white kaftan and a traditional cap. He was no longer frail. His cheeks were full, and his eyes, now fixed by surgery, were sharp and bright. He watched 2 toddlers, Nelson's twin daughters, chasing a ball across the grass. They shrieked with laughter, stumbling over their own feet. "Grandpa, Grandpa, watch this!" they yelled. Obi laughed, a sound that was deep, full, and devoid of the fear that had once ruled his existence. He rested his hand on a walking stick, not because he needed it, but because it made him look distinguished. Nelson walked out onto the patio, holding a tablet. He sat on the arm of Obi's chair. "Baba," he said softly, "the board of directors just approved the new budget for the foundation. This year, the Obi Emeka Medical Fund will pay for emergency surgeries for 500 children across the state. No questions asked, no deposits required." Obi looked at the younger man, his heart swelling. Decades ago, he had given away 50,000 naira, a seed sown in desperation and faith. He had thought he lost everything that day. But looking at the strong man beside him, the laughing children, and the legacy of healing that bore his name, Obi realized the truth. He hadn't lost his savings. He had invested them in the only thing that mattered. "You did well, my son," Obi whispered, placing his hand over Nelson's. "You did well." Nelson smiled, leaning his head on the old man's shoulder as the sun finally set, bringing a peaceful end to the long, hard road. "You made it to the end, thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you loved this story, the next one is going to blow your mind. I'm talking more twists, more emotion, more of everything that keeps you hooked. Click on that image on your screen right now and jump straight into the next tale. You're going to love it."